As far back as about 2017, there has occasionally been a game that's released every year or every 2 years that's really stood out to me and been one that I really loved, I got hyperfixated over, wanted to talk to all my friends about, and just wanted to basically live and breathe that game for as long as possible. And elements of previous games are scattered around my room. But I genuinely have not been this excited to talk about a game maybe ever, to the point where I've kind of put this video off because I'm kind of scared that I won't do enough justice in talking about it. Because today, I want to talk about the Game of the Year 2023, and that award being the reason that I picked it up. So why not just show you a little bit of it to give you a taste rather than me introducing it very blandly. Welcome back to Choice Thoughts. I'm very sorry for my terrible upload schedule. It's part of the intro at this point. I may as well not pretend otherwise. But today, I am talking about Baldur's Gate 3. The reason that I have not uploaded on the main channel for weeks until yesterday, the reason I've not done extra stuff on here, I genuinely plan to do a Best Games of 2023 and then also a Baldur's Gate 3 video, and it's now 12th of January, so is it still worth doing Best Games 2023? If you'd still want to see that this month, let me know, I will still put something together. But I picked up Baldur's Gate 3 after it swept the Game Awards at the start of December. It was a game I was kind of considering getting for a while, but the idea of the kind of CRPG combat was what was putting me off. I wasn't sure if that was really going to be my kind of game. But after it swept as many awards as it did, and I'd seen some people raving about it, I thought, you know what? I don't buy that many games myself at the minute. I may as well treat myself to one and just see what it's like. And I quite literally have not stopped playing it on my Xbox whenever I've had free time since the Game Awards, which was what, December the 8th, 2023? So we're over a month and I'm still playing it constantly. I have started about 7 different runs, some with friends, which I've barely done, but I've got about 3 or 4 main runs myself that I've been doing. And I really should have mentioned I've got one run I am doing over on twitch.tv/RedArcher Live about once a week. We're going to put a couple of hours into a playthrough. It'll only be on stream. I won't do anything in between. So if you want to check the game out without buying it, you can always watch me playing along with it once a week for however long it takes this year. I will put the previous couple of streams I've done on the VOD channel very soon, but you can still watch them on Twitch, but feel free to go and check it out if you want to see me play through. I've got so much I want to say about this game, so I want to try and go over as much as I can about it without going into spoilers to begin with. As per usual, there will be a spoiler section at the end of the video. I know in my Discord server, a lot of people have really been enjoying the game and picked it up. So if you happen to not know what Baldur's Gate 3 is, it is a CRPG, which is a computer RPG. It's designed to be kind of like one of those top-down strategy combat games, but with a full-on RPG story, characters, conversations, and all that stuff behind it. To me, it kind of seems like a fantasy version of Mass Effect, but the biggest difference is the combat. You know, you've got those deep relationships with characters, you've got a really good story, but it's the difference in the combat, and honestly, I much prefer that to Mass Effect. Mass Effect was very simple, and I know back in my Mass Effect video, I said that was the one thing I was very impartial about the combat. It was alright, it was nothing special. Honestly, in this, as someone who'd only really done kind of take-your-turn combat in games like Worms over the past, 10, 20 years, it was quite refreshing to play this. The idea is you are part of a party of characters that takes place within the Dungeons & Dragons universe, a universe I have zero experience with before this, and within it, you are trying to get a tadpole to be put in your brain, out of your brain, otherwise you'll turn into a big freaky squid creature known as a mind flayer. That's the main setup, and to be fair, the plot doesn't really pick up from there until Act 2 to Act 3. Act 1 honestly could just be its own game, but there are 3 distinct acts in the game, and within about usually a 75 to 100 hour playtime is what the devs say. It took me 70 hours to beat the game. I think maybe I was skipping over some dialogue for a reason I'll get into later. The point is, you get a long amount of playtime out of just your first run, and each act could almost be its own game. And I've thought a lot about the value for money when I compare Baldur's Gate 3 in playtime to, say, Life is Strange True Colours. I paid £70 for the Ultimate Edition of that, and the base game True Colours you could beat in 8-9 hours, the DLC 2, so you comfortably have it done within 12 hours, a lot less probably. Whereas Baldur's Gate 3 I paid £58 for, I've had a 70-hour run, and I've got far more than that. If I check now, I think I'm probably somewhere in the 250 hours playtime already, so value for money wise, it's astonishing. And I think part of what makes the game so good is that it is just this big open sandbox in that Dungeons & Dragons world where you can interact with a whole host of characters. There's a whole load of choices. You can fight people, you can make peace with people, you can just go invisible and dodge people. The amount of flexibility in this game is genuinely mind-boggling, and I'm going to try and go into as much detail on all the different portions as I can, but that's the main gist of it. You're trying to get a tadpole out of your brain, and you're going on an adventure, you're meeting friends, you're building a party in your camp where you can have meaningful relationships with different characters, you can romance most of them, basically just get to live, breathe, and chew on this world for however long you play the game for, if you manage to beat it. I know some people that just keep making new characters over and over again, but like I used to do with Skyrim. So it's got a bit of a big setup. The plot really goes into detail, like I said, in the later end of the game, and I will talk about that in the spoilers section because I don't want to spoil anything if you don't know it. My YouTube recommended has been full of Baldur's Gate 3 stuff, and I've had something spoiled for me that I wish I hadn't for different runs, so I want to make sure that you guys don't get those spoilers unless you're looking for them. So I want to start first off by focusing on the characters, because to me, I'm going to naturally do some comparisons to, in particular, Mass Effect, because that was my favourite game of all time. I've said that already about that being my biggest one. I think I went to say True Colours, Life is Strange was my new favourite. That was very much recency bias, and obviously recency bias can apply at any point. Maybe I'll change my mind about Baldur's Gate later, but I really doubt it on this one. But Mass Effect, for me, it was this big, deep story you'd play out over the course of a few weeks if you played all games back to back. You'd have all these relationships with characters, you'd have a great space opera story taking you right the way through, and it was genuinely some of the best video game writing and execution plot-wise I'd ever seen. Baldur's Gate 3, to me, takes what made Mass Effect's characters so good and somehow, in a way that's almost unbeknownst to me, does it even better. I honestly didn't think you could get better than some of the relationships I'd seen in like a BioWare game with those kinds of relationship building and character development. But with every single character in your camp in Baldur's Gate 3, your choices can affect their attitude to you. Their attitude to you will impact how they speak to you, how much they tell you, and how much they tell you and how they feel about you will impact choices later in the game. For example, there is a choice with Shadowheart in Act 2, not spoiling anything, one of the main campmates, and if you have lower affinity with her, the way you respond to some of the choices with her big decision can play out differently. We're talking about that amount of depth in the game. How well you build your relationships, how well you get on with people, how much you talk to them will genuinely impact how they behave around you, and will also have knock-on impacts on the plot, which is a level of depth you just don't really see in many video games, to the point where I'm pretty sure last month it started a big, long debate, or was it when the game came out, about how it was setting an unrealistic expectation for future RPGs. That's a whole other debate that I don't really want to get into, but that's the caliber we're talking. It started a whole discussion online about should RPGs all be as good as this. For me, my personal character, I've already mentioned her, is Shadowheart. I think her personal character story is the most interesting out of all of them. That is not to say the others are not. I think Astarian's also deserves some very serious mention. His plot is really, really good. But every main camp character, the origin characters I should say, because there are some people in the camp that are not origin characters, meaning you can't start the game as them. People like Shadowheart, Astarian, Karlach, if you want to play the game as them and not make your own character, you can do that. So they're the ones with the most depth. But even ones that come into the camp later, like Halsin, you can have people like Jaheira or Minsk, who you may know if you've played previous Baldur's Gate games. I haven't. But even those characters have some depth, even if you can't romance them or you don't see them until later in the game. The game makes a great deal of effort to put as much depth into every character as physically possible. And it's just one of the things that I really like. As I've said, I've done several runs of the game. I've only finished one so far. But in all of them, I keep thinking, I've not talked to this character much. There's so much more I could do here. There's so much more I could do with their story. There's so many more things I could say and explore. And it just has your brain kind of rattling, thinking, oh, I'm going to do this time. I'm going to do this. I'm going to play with this person. I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to do this romance. And it's just a pinball in your brain. But me personally, my first run, I made my own character. It was a half-elf fighter. Her name was Raya. And just the amount of depth in that character creator. The first time I went to play it two-player with a friend. We both realised quickly we'd rather do our own stories and team up later. But I kept the same character. In that creator, I must have spent at least an hour putting them together. There's so much choice on there, to the point where it might be a little bit overpowering if you don't know what's going on, because I certainly didn't. It feels like there's a lot of choices shoved in your face very quickly of, do you want your character to be good at this, or do that? My best advice for that, if you're struggling, is just to kind of go with it. If something sounds cool, give it a shot. You can change these things later as you get used to the way the game works. The only thing you can't change after you've made your character is their species and also your physical builds, whether you go for a more strong masculine build or a more smaller feminine build, whatever they are, they stay the same. same, but your actual physical appearance, class, skills, all that stuff can change like that for the price of 100 gold. That's easy to get hold of, which I really like, because you can keep molding and developing your character and changing things around if you want to as you go. And the same applies for Origin characters. Even though they all have pre-established classes, Lae'zel's a fighter, Karlach's a barbarian, Astarian's a rogue, you want to mix it up and change them all, make them all bards, make them all fighters, make them all warlocks, you can do that. The amount of customization is kind of nuts. I didn't expect them to let you touch the Origin characters in that way, but they do. And the reason that I said earlier about me skipping dialogue, and I feel like it's a good point to mention it now before I go into it any further, is that I unfortunately was a victim of the Xbox save file bug. If you're not aware of it, on Xbox there is a chance that sometimes every save file you have on your Xbox for Baldur's Gate 3 will vanish like that. It won't be on the cloud, it won't be on your Xbox, they'll just be gone. I think the issue relates down to how Xbox's cloud storage works, because they only let you store so much of a save file locally, but for some reason there's some kind of inherent bug there that clashed with Baldur's Gate 3 and ended up getting your save files purged. That is being fixed. Larian have confirmed an update from Xbox is going out as early as the 16th of January that will aim to fix this. They're fairly sure it will do so fingers crossed. As a result, I lost 57 hours of my first playthrough. I was quite a decent chunk through Act 3, and the fact that I, after being a little bit upset and doing a few tweets, just went straight back in and went from the start again, that tells you how addicted I was to the game, because for any other game I probably would have just gone, you know what, I really can't, I'm not doing this again, I'll wait, I'm just going to leave it for a bit. I was that enthralled with the characters and the world that we were in, and that's why I think maybe my final run was shorter, because there was dialogue I'd seen before, because I was making similar choices and I was skipping some bits. But within the characters there is also the romance, and I want to talk about that a little bit, because again, I want to pick up on why I think it's better than other games. And to me, the romance, weirdly, it's a combination of the best aspects of Mass Effect and maybe a strange mention, but Fallout 4. Fallout 4 introduced the kind of affinity system that Bethesda games now have with Starfield, as mid as that game was, but it allowed you to basically improve a character's opinion of you by doing certain things they liked and disliked. Now, it was a little bit silly in Fallout 4 because some things like picking a lock would make someone's affinity increase. It's not like that in Baldur's Gate 3. It's actual dialogue choices and things you do and things you say, but then you have the in-depth relationships that Mass Effect offers, where you build up this relationship over the course of 1, 2, 3 games, in this case 1, 2, 3 acts. There's often a big romantic scene at some point in the game, usually in Act 3 or maybe tail end of Act 2, but overall you feel like you're building a proper deep relationship that's written really well and gets you invested in the characters, which I don't think Fallout 4 did well. It was just kind of like a conversation where you go, I'm in love with you, and they go, oh, really? And that's it. But my point is, I think it takes some of the best elements of video game romances into mind, and then it allows you to build a relationship with a character that you don't really see in many games. Like I said, Mass Effect's the only other one I can think of, and I would imagine Dragon Age is similar. It's a franchise I've not touched. Just that kind of depth of relationship I think is very, very strong, and I really appreciate that. In terms of choices, I wanted to do a video on Detroit Become Human when I first played that about a year or two ago when I picked up my PS5. There's some exclusives I still haven't played, like Days Gone or God of War, but some of the first games I picked up on my PS5 were Last of Us Part 2, and Detroit Become Human, because I'd heard about Detroit in particular, just how in-depth they went into branching the narrative based on your choices, and I don't think a game has ever existed like that before. Baldur's Gate 3, while it's not as clean-cut as that, where you go, you're going on a different branch now, things really do split. If you want to kill a key character at a certain point, or make a certain choice that will make characters turn on you, that cuts off an entire storyline related to that character. It can then impact what you do later in the game. I'm going to do a very brief spoiler here, and I'll put a marker on, because I do want to say the spoilers to later, but this is relevant to right now. It's Act 1 to Act 2 spoiler. In the first act for the game, I ended up accidentally getting everyone in the Grove killed. I killed the lead druid, Korga, because I thought she was annoying, as most people do, and it started a war between the druids and the tieflings. Everyone killed each other, and that meant the character I was looking for, Halzin, just kind of got lost in the fray. I never got to meet him, and that then meant in Act 2, I couldn't cure the Shadow Curse. I couldn't cure the land of the curse that was on it, and I just had to leave it as it was. And I didn't even know you could cure it, because I'd never got there with Halzin. When I lost my save after 57 hours and went back in and got Halzin, I was like, oh, I missed out on a lot there. So back from the spoiler, the point I'm trying to say is that the different ways you behave can really impact the story. While you're still going to have a particular big face-off at the end of the game, no matter what you do, the way in which you get there and the story beats that change around it, who you bring, how they feel about you, is very much putty in your hands. It's kind of insane just how unique your story can be leading up to that point. And so if you're really looking for a game where you get a lot of in-depth dialogue with characters that you relate to, or at least understand and sympathize with and want to get to know better, and you want to go on a big long adventure that really does tailor to how you play and what you say, this is the game for you. Definitively, I don't think there's ever been a better description of a game than that. But as I said, it's part dialogue and part combat, and the combat, I just want to give a bit of a mention. I already mentioned this kind of a little bit earlier, but the combat of the game, I'm kind of surprised how much I liked it. When I was watching the Game Awards, the thing that was putting me off just buying it immediately as it started picking up awards was I was thinking, is the combat for me? You have all these abilities, it looks a bit like an MMO, which I don't have much experience with those kind of big hot bars full of all sorts of commands. I went to play like an hour of Star Wars The Old Republic and haven't gone back yet. The actual kind of tactical nature of the combat, where as I said, it's turn-based, you get given an order right at the start as to who plays their turns. It's not your team, enemy team, it's each character one by one. It's based on initiative, which is like a stat your character can have. But you take it in turns, you all have particular powers you can use, and you're trying to obviously eliminate all your enemies. You can even knock them out and make them unconscious if you want. There's a stat you can flick where you don't kill anybody, you just knock people out, and that can even have consequences. There is a character called Minthara who's at the start of the game a bad character. If you knock her out in Act 1 rather than kill her, without spoiling it, later on, you can bring her into your camp and she can be a friend of yours. That level of depth, it's not even inherently made obvious to you, it's just that little extra layer that I think is very, very well done. I know, by the way, that wasn't in the game at launch. There are a few things that have been added to the game since launch, and I appreciate that, but I'm treating it as a full package now for people who are picking it up. But honestly, I'm really, really intrigued to experiment more with the combat, because that varies most depending on your class, whether you have a lot of spells, if you're more of a wizard, if you have a lot of actual fighting, combat moves with swords, battle axes, whether you can scream and rage to get more attacks or to deal more damage, whether you can have bonus actions to just keep hitting people with swords if you're a fighter. It's really in-depth, and there's some very interesting experimentation you can do with the different abilities. For me, I kept messing around even in my first playthrough until like 50 hours in, and at one point I discovered a spell that Shadowheart could cast called Spirit Guardians, which gives you a big circle around a character, and anyone who walks into it takes a particular amount of damage. And the funniest moment of this for me was playing a scene. I don't know if I have the clip. If I do, I will play it on screen now, but it's basically a clip where Shadowheart has the Spirit Guardians activated. They go into a cellar with about 30 rats that they're told they need to kill as like a little mini side quest, and every rat just runs into the circle and instantly dies. It's the funniest thing, and it just means you have no problem with the combat, having to one by one kill the rats. Stuff like that you can just discover by experimenting with powers is so interesting. The combat will probably seem overwhelming if you're new to a CRPG like I was, but give it a bit of chance, experiment around with it, you will get used to it, and I honestly will be surprised if you don't find a way to love it. As I wrap up towards the spoiler section, there's a few more things I want to talk about on a like kind of smaller level. For one thing, the visuals. I know that people go on about graphics and whether they're good or bad in games, but I have posted a lot of screenshots from Baldur's Gate 3 over the last month or so on my Twitter, which you can go follow if you want at Red Archer Live. But there have been a couple of screenshots I've shared where I've just looked at them and gone, how is this a game? Like, how do graphics look this good now? I'm only playing on a 1440p monitor. I'm not even at 4K gaming level. Characters' faces, the details, and also the environments around them. Sometimes it can buckle under the weight of it. Act 3 in particular can have some performance issues where frames will drop because there's so many characters. There's the odd character who has little pieces of faces flying out, like texture issues. But for a game as deep as this, I'm not really as bothered by that, and I know they're probably working to fix each one of these bits bit by bit, so I'm not really too annoyed. But from an actual subjective visual level, it's a gorgeous game, and I just wanted to give that a mention. I also really wanted to just talk about how replayable the game is. I've talked a bit about the depth already, but just as a kind of, to put it on the record and have it as a chapter marker, to say that with Baldur's Gate 3, you can replay and do things super duper differently is vastly understating it. You making your own character, you have an origin playthrough, you can play as the Dark Urge, which is a whole unique campaign where you don't remember who you are and you have to figure out who you are with this vicious bloodlust in your brain as you're playing. Introduces a whole new load of dialogue, new choices. I've been playing that and it's absolutely brilliant. I actually think there's an ending if you do the good version of Dark Urge. There's a point in the story which I really wish was in the main game. It was such a great story beat that I was like, that's just in Dark Urge. That's amazing. Like, there's really good stuff there. So if you're thinking this is the kind of game where you're like, am I going to be able to replay this and do things differently? Yes, you will never get tired of replaying and trying different things in this game, and I just love that about it. The fact that in my head I already have several runs planned of what I'm going to do, who I'm going to play as, what I'm going to do, what my choices will be, that's really good for a game like that, because very often you can play a game once or twice and go, do you know what? That'll do me. I love Mass Effect, but I've only played it through 2 or 3 times in, 2.5 years, like fully start to finish. Baldur's Gate 3, I'm going to beat that. I'm going to beat that fast. But finally, the last big thing I've got to say is give a shout out to Borislav Slavov, I think is how you say his name, who is the composer of the soundtrack, and it's easily one of the greatest video game soundtracks of all time. You have got boss themes, main themes, fighting themes, romance themes, all sorts of things strewn across this game, most of which are on Spotify. There are some that are not, and I really wish they were. There's an extended one of a piece called Night Song that's only on YouTube and not on Spotify, which really irritates me because I love the extended version. But the soundtrack is is absolutely phenomenal. I don't want to go into where things appear too much or why they're good or why they're bad, but there is a particular motif that you hear in a good piece of the tracks, a good amount of them, I'd say maybe 40%, 50% of them, you'll hear in the main theme. I'll play it now. And you will hear that either altered or changed in a bunch of different tracks. Here's a couple of examples. There's just something about that I really, really love. I love that there's kind of like a thorough line throughout the soundtrack, but all the pieces are still very different. And whenever you hear it, it brings you back and going, oh yeah, there's the main theme again, looping back around. I really love that. And I think it's very special, but also it doesn't get in the way of some songs. There are some songs, like I said, there's a particular boss fight theme that I don't want to spoil, where there's singing, there's dramatic church organs, it's really grand, but there's no main theme there. That's a unique piece of music. There are pieces that will just stand up on their own. Across the board, there isn't a bad song on that soundtrack. It's actually insane how good it is. So I had to give it a mention because really it's just phenomenal. But those are my overall thoughts on Baldur's Gate 3, and I'll say on the record right now, I genuinely think that this is my favourite game of all time. Now, it takes the cake. I think it beats Mass Effect. I really, really do. As I said, maybe it's recency bias. Maybe that will change over time. I really don't know. But as of right now, I can feel quite confident in saying that I don't think a game is going to beat this one for a very long time, if ever. It's such a unique and fantastically put together game that I think it's going to take a lot of work to beat. I really, really do. I can only hope that more expansions are coming for the game. I have seen the theories, and the epilogue that was added to the game in the 5th patch really does hint that there could be like an expansion down the line, because obviously with a game like this where choices impact it so much, it's not going to be very easy to make a direct sequel. They'll probably do something different if they do a Baldur's Gate 4, or if Larian go back to making a Divinity Original Sin game. They're known more for those as well. Whatever they do, a straight-up follow with these characters is probably not going to happen, but an expansion, that could. And I'd be really keen to see them do something with that if they could. I would love more time with these characters. But all in all, perfect 10 out of 10. I'd give it a higher score if it was possible. Perfect game. And if you were on the fence about it, buy it. You won't be disappointed. I really don't think you will. Okay, so let's get into the spoiler section. Let's talk a little bit about a few different things that I really liked about the game. I'm going to kind of reel them off because I don't want to go for 50 hours on this video. I've already been recording for 25, which is making my editing brain sweat. So, my ending for the game, I had Raya get to the end, destroy the brain, didn't become an illithid at any point. Fun fact, in my first run before I lost my save files, I started using the tadpoles to upgrade illithid powers, and then I got the offer of becoming partial illithid, and I had to roll a natural 20 to get rid of it. That was not good. So in my refreshed run, when I had to start from the beginning, I made sure not to do that. But I went for a very good straight playthrough of just being a good guy with Shadowheart as my main romance. So we got to the end. My main party was Shadowheart, Astarion, and Karlach. They were the ones I ran with for most of the game. I think that was a really good arrangement of a healer, a tough barbarian, you got a sneak attack person, then me playing as a fighter. Some of the characters got some more sad endings, like Astarion being burned by the sun again. That's really heartbreaking. Karlach not being able to stick around in our world. I mean, her story in particular, her speech after you kill Gortash about wanting to deserve, like, feeling like she deserves more. I mean, not to be a Doctor Who nerd, really gave me 10th Doctor vibes from his final speech with Wilf, where he's like, I could do so much more. Like, it's a really emotive moment where they're just kind of carrying the scene. You feel the emotion and it really gets to you. That is just absolutely phenomenal. But knowing that you could save her, I was glad about that. I had her go with Will, the Blade of Avernus, to go and survive in the Hells. And as the epilogue hints, maybe she won't be there forever, which I really, really like, because it makes me sad that she's kind of a tragic character. There's no way to fix her engine without her just being back in the Hells. So I'd be intrigued to see what else they do from there. But the overall plot, as I said, it really picks up in Act 2 and 3. It's a bold move to save your main villains, or your main kind of idea of the villains, until the end of the second act. Like, you're really messing around, exploring and building up to this point for a good 30, 40, 50 more hours. And then to reveal it, you're like, oh wow, this is taking a completely different turn, and then revealing that the person guarding you in your dreams is a mind flayer, and then going on from that to figure out that the mind flayer is actually Baldur, and the person who created all of Baldur's Gate. That one literally had me doing like a pog what face. I couldn't believe that. There's some really good story beats that are saved towards the end, and in any other game, I'd kind of use that as a criticism, that I would say it's not very well paced, but weirdly it works in this game, because I think having that time to get absorbed into the world, get used to your characters and build your relationships, and then be brought back in, is almost like the game saying, look, we gave you a chance to explore, get to know everyone, Now we're going to show you why your friendship is important, because you're going to use it and your alliances and everyone that you've met so far to beat these 3 people, to get control or destroy a brain and save an entire realm. Like, it works really well. I'm really surprised by it, and I thought it was absolutely phenomenally executed. But right next to that, as I said, and I want to give some special mention, is Shadowheart's personal quest line. I think what makes her stand out, and it's almost a little unfair in some ways, is that her quest line is directly tied to the main story in a way that most personal quest lines aren't. Gale's obviously climaxes with the Crown of Karsus, which you do beat in the get in the final campaign. Karlach's, as I said, you kill GOTY, she makes a speech about her engine, but you don't have to have fixed it in the main story. Shadowheart's in particular builds up to the Gauntlet of Shar, which you have to go through to get to the end of Act 2. The real crux is Act 2, where they're dealing with the Night Song, and whether she abandons her loyalty to Shar or fulfills it and kills the Night Song, which can have a very serious impact on the game and its consequences. That probably gives it a bit of bias as to why I think it's so strong, but I really do like the idea of this kind of religious, not fanatic, but someone who's been so brainwashed by a particular, like, belief system, and then breaking her free of that, poking holes in it and saying, this doesn't sound right, and her going, what are you talking about? But the more you do it, the more she goes, maybe you're onto something, and then having this big revelation moment where she finds out she's been lied to all of her life, her parents are alive, she was kidnapped and brought into this organization against her will, basically. It's a really well done story, and in some strange ways really does mirror a bit with the Dark Urge, which I really like. If you do the Dark Urge story and you go for the dark side, which I did have a little bit of a look at the short-term consequences, Shadowheart's reaction of being like, you know, I stood up to and defied my goddess, but you couldn't defy yours. Like, there's really good character moments there that I think are very strong, and I really, really like that. So Shadowheart, easily best companion in the game, best romance that I've seen so far. I've watched a lot of the videos online. I think her kind of progression is just absolutely astonishing, and I just think that she's one of the best video game companions I've ever seen. Really like her. Really, really do. I also want to mention Gale, for the reason being that I had a real interest into how much of his orb and the explosion you can create with it would play into the game. It turns out that this bomb in his chest, this orb, can be detonated in Act 2, and it will just end the game there. You'll get credits. You won't have an Act 3, which is insane. I love that idea. You can also have him go up and face the Nether Brain on his own if you have him with you and you're about to climb it. Go, right, you go up and detonate your orb, and he'll do it. You can also, as a last-ditch resort, if you're on the Brain fighting and things aren't going well, when you're playing as Gale, you can have him just trigger it as an ability, and it creates a unique bit of dialogue where he goes, close your eyes, it's going to be over, we have to finish this even though we won't survive. You would think that a plotline like that with the orb would either be heavily reined in on and you'd have to use it to end the game, or it would just be like, oh, here's a convenient narrative reason why this isn't going to be used after all. But no, you really can just use that as an optional thing if you want, and I did, and then watching videos online, I was like, oh my gosh, the customization with just how you handle the ending is insane. It's absolutely insane. Dark Urge in particular, as I kind of hinted at, I am really fascinated by that. I wanted to do a full evil playthrough, but as I was going through it, I really liked the idea of trying to do a good guy, of like fighting the edges, occasionally giving in to them for the sake of the narrative and like exploring what that does. But I really liked coming towards the good ending and seeing how that plays out. I am still finishing that particular campaign right now. I've just literally defied Baal and gone, you know what, I'm going to be a good guy. I'm kind of upset that YouTube had spoiled so much about Dark Urge to me, because by that point I've been looking at online clips for the game, so I'd finished the full playthrough myself, but Dark Urge things started popping up and revealing this thing. You can become a monster. Oh, you're actually a child of Baal. Like, those things were robbed from me. I didn't know those as big surprises, and I wish I had. But still, as an actual story, I think it's fantastic and well worth playing through. I'm just keen to keep trying things out. I really, really, really am, and just exploring more stories. Astarion's Ascendant Vampire, I thought was a particularly edgy and dark end to his particular character. Again, that was something I did in my first initial aborted run after I lost my save file. I went for the good guy version where he didn't take the powers in the end because I thought it was better for his character. But I want to see a little bit more detail, spend more time with Gale, I want to spend more time with Lae'zel, and I want to spend a little bit more time with Karlach via the romance. I'm keen to see what goes on there. Will I like, but he wasn't like my favourite character, and Jaheira and Minsk and Halsin I didn't spend much time with because they were kind of side companions, and I was already invested in who I had in my party, the origin characters, to begin with. So there's still a lot I need to do and a lot of stories I want to explore, but I really am bowled over by just how amazing this game is. I just think it's absolutely fantastic. I think the way that all the choices can be dictated, whether you romance a particular character, whether you work with the Emperor against him, saving Orpheus, helping the Githyanki, whether or not you help the Druids, or the Goblins, or the Tieflings, how you destroy the brain, how you control it, whether you give into your dark urges, whether you overcome them and have Withers revive you and be like, you know what, you did a good thing, you're not dead. There's so many things that are so good. And even the music changing, like fighting Raphael, that was another thing I did in my particular story. I signed his contract and then broke into the House of Hope and stole it. I mean, obviously I could have rejected him and gone and stole the hammer, but I kind of like the idea of accepting it and then breaking the contract under his nose. Narratively, I think that's just more interesting. But his final boss fight with 666 health and Raphael's final act blaring, so much good stuff in here, and so much hidden stuff as well. There'll be things I just don't know about yet. Like, I recently started to play through as a bard. That was my Dark Urge. She was a bard elf character, and I came across Alfira in the Grove, and if you give her the lyrics for her song as a bard, a unique role, then she will just do a full performance of the Weeping Dawn, the actual proper studio version that you just can't see if you're not playing as a bard. I went to tell one of my friends and show him and was like, let's do this, I want to see this happen, and I wasn't a bard, none of us were in the party, and I realised you couldn't get it. There's so many unique things that I just know I don't know about, and I'm excited to keep finding more within this game. I don't think I'll ever get tired of exploring new things. I really, really don't. So all in all, what a fantastic game. That's all my thoughts on Baldur's Gate 3 after about half an hour of recording. So I really hope you've enjoyed this kind of in-depth analysis into my thoughts on the game and why I think it thoroughly deserves the Game of the Year awards. Which, by the way, final thing I will say, people at the Game Awards getting salty that Spider-Man 2 didn't win, that was never going to happen. It just wasn't going to happen. Spider-Man 2 I loved. Thought it was a great game. I got to 100%, I beat it. But it was very similar to Spider-Man 1 in a lot of ways. I think Game of the Year every year should be a game that is innovative, that does something fresh, that does something new, and brings a lot of new people either into a new genre or stands out as like, this was the biggest thing of the year. And granted, there are still some games on that list I haven't yet played, but I genuinely find it hard to believe that any game could be as expansive and as deep as Baldur's Gate 3 was. When that came out and it won the Game of the Year award on that night, that was the moment where I went, okay, that's it, I've clearly got to play this. The only reason I didn't get the 2022 Game of the Year, Elden Ring, is because I'm not really into Souls-likes. I've tried Dark Souls, it wasn't for me. Spider-Man 2 deserved some Game of the Year awards, it definitely did. It getting robbed of all of them was a real shame, because it was a great game, but Jedi Survivor didn't win anything, did it? And I enjoyed that more than Spider-Man 2, but I'm just happy that the game I ended up playing in the end got as many awards as it did, because let me tell you, Baldur's Gate 3, it deserved it. So there you go. Thank you all very much for watching this video on Baldur's Gate 3. If you've enjoyed it, please drop a thumbs up and let me know if you want to see more content by commenting down below what you want to see me talk about. I haven't done anything on Doctor Who for the specials, and I planned to, so I should hopefully do that soon. Again, blame Baldur's Gate 3. By the time the 60th specials had ended, I'd started playing the game and didn't want to stop, so I was like, recording? Nah. So let me know, but I will hopefully get better at loading this year. I keep saying it, I'll probably keep failing it, but just have a bit of faith in me, and you never know, maybe more uploads will come. But thank you all very much for watching. I will see you all hopefully very soon in another video. Until then, my name is Troy, and these were my thoughts.